So he says, وَآتُوا الْيَتَامَ أَمْوَالَهُم, and give orphans their wealth. And this is, orphans here is also representative of anyone who's in your authority, that you have their money. But in particular, orphans, because they're the weakest. They have no parents to protect them. And so when you have orphans that you're taking care of, Allah is saying, give them your wealth. And that's a protection of the weak again. If you're going to protect the orphans, you're certainly going to protect other weak people that have more power than orphans. And that's why Quran is always, if you look at it, the principles are always rooted in the lowest common denominator. You see, they're always rooted in the lowest common denominator, because if you'll do that, you'll certainly do it with things that figure in higher. So don't devour or consume the wealth. وَآتُوا الْيَتَامَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ وَلَا تَتَبَدَّلُوا الْخَبِيثَ بِالطَّيِّبِ. Don't exchange the foul for the good. If Allah's giving you something good, don't make it foul. So don't make fair foul. If you're entrusted with the orphans, don't betray that trust, because whatever you get from it, it's not tayyib, it's khabith now. And one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ came was لِيُحَرِّمَ الْخَبَائِث, in order to prohibit those things that are foul. And khubth is the opposite of tayyib. It's the opposite of tayyib, what's pure. And Allah loves pure, and He hates the khabith, right? Allah hates the khabith. And He even said, لَا تَقُولُوا خَبُثَتْ نَفْسِي. Don't say my nafs is khabitha, because it's such a horrible thing. But say your nafs is lazy or something. But don't say khabitha, because you don't want to be khabith. وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَهُمْ إِلَىٰ أَمْوَالِكُمْ. Right? So don't devour their wealth with your wealth. Because see, what happens is, when you're taking care of the orphan, you can mix. So you can invest in the orphan with your wealth. And then what happens is, you begin to devour, like you're not giving them their due. So you utilize their wealth, which is their wealth, and you should be taking care of it. And then, إِنَّهُ كَانَ حُوبًا كَبِيرًا. This is a great wrong. Hub is a dhanb. It's a great sin to do that. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى. If you're afraid of not being the equal with these orphans, in dealing with their wealth. And here it's marriage, because what the Arabs did traditionally was, if they had an orphan, and this, because it was a clannish society, often if parents died, the father died, and this happened a lot. I mean, there was higher mortality rates. A lot of women died in childbirth. Husbands died in sicknesses, journeys, also in clannish warfare and things like this. So what they would do is, if they had an orphan that had money, they would marry the orphan. The orphan's under their authority. They would marry the orphan in order to get the money. So this was something that was common in the Arabian Peninsula, was to marry the orphan in order to add to their own wealth. And also because what they would do is, they would give them a very insignificant dowry or something like that. So Allah is saying that if you're fearful of doing this, أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى, then فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. Then marry from other women. Don't marry orphan women. If you're going to oppress them, don't marry them. And this is again important, because if you won't do this on the weakest one, you see, because if you have a yatima, she's an orphan, she doesn't have anybody to protect her, and you're going to oppress her. So if you're worried about oppressing her, don't go there. Marry somebody that you're not going to be able to do that with. So again, it's going to the least common denominator. Because here's a woman, but also an orphan. And there's two weaknesses, and that's the majority of women. I mean, there are strong women and in terms of relationships with husbands, but generally in the world, the woman is easier to oppress. And to deny that is it's a type of just denial about the real world. So it's a problem. So Allah says, إِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. اثنين, right? 2, 3, or 4. And this is for khiyar, it's choice. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins with 2, 3, or 4, but then goes back, because it begins in khiftum, right? About orphans. Then marry from other women who are not orphans, 2, 3, or 4. فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا. But if you're afraid that you won't be just between those, see, you were worried about not being just to orphans, and now you have the possibility of marrying 2, 3, or 4 women. If you can't be just with them, فَوَاحِدَةً, then just marry one. All right, so that's the command there, فَوَاحِدَةً. أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, which in certain historical situations that verse applies. It's not applicable now. ذَلِكَ أَدْنَى أَلَّا تَعُولُوا, because that will prevent you from being unjust. Ala here means, if you say ala al-mizan, it means that there was imbalance in when you weighed something, it means it was imbalanced. Or you say ala al-hukm, jar al-hukm, it was unfair judgment. So ذَلِكَ أَدْنَى أَلَّا تَعُولُوا, because that's better if you don't, so you're not being unjust. In other words, to marry one. And this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave, this is considered mubah, it's ibaha, which is ta'addud al-zawjat, or it's actually a polygyny. You have polygamy as either male or female, and polygyny is multiple wives, and polyandry is multiple husbands, which has occurred rarely. In very few societies have you had polyandrous societies. Very few. It's occurred a few times in history, but the vast majority of societies have been polygynous. The overwhelming majority of civilizations have been polygynous. Christianity was originally a polygynous tradition, and it was banned by the Emperor Justinian. So early Christians had more than one wife. So it's not, for Christians to say it's not part of Christianity, it's not true. I mean, it came in with a Roman emperor, and then it became the law. And it's become the law, and one of the ironies of this culture is that they allow the most bizarre relationships. I mean, you can have, if people are happy about it, a person can live with 3 husbands or 2 wives or 4 wives, as long as they don't legally do anything. There's nothing, nobody's going to take you to court. So if somebody has 3 or 4 women that they have a relationship with, he's not going to have any trouble in this society. But the minute you give one of those or all those women legal rights within the relationship, then it's declared unacceptable. And that's really what this is about. It's about establishing legal rights, because the phenomenon exists. It's always existed, and it will always exist. As long as men are walking around the earth, you're going to have men that have relationships with more than one woman. But what Islam is saying is you have a legal responsibility. That's what it's about. It's about haqq. So you cannot just abuse a woman on a road trip, or you can't set her up in an apartment, which is the way the Europeans do it. In France, I mean, it's very common for wealthy men to have a mistress. That's what they call it. They even have a word for it. And it's an old English word. It's not new. Islam it's a practical religion. It deals with human beings as they are, not as they should be. I mean, there's always the should be there, but it deals with them as they are, and then makes that as they are as it should be, given they are like that. That's what Islam does. Now, within the Maliki madhab, a woman can stipulate that she doesn't want to be part of a multiple marriage, and that's a sound stipulation in the contract. So even amongst the fuqaha, that exists. But generally, this is for ibaha, and Allah's saying, if you fear, and there's a hadith that people who had 2 wives and weren't just to one of them, they come and half their body is paralyzed on the Yawm al-Qiyamah. And there was one of the Salaf who had, he would do everything. He would weigh like food and things when he would distribute food for the wives, because he was so worried about the haqq of the wives. وَآتُوا النِّسَاءَ صَدُقَاتِهِنَّ نِحْلًا, and give the women their dowries nihla, as a fariḍa. This is a fard. It's a gift, but it's a fard. And it's part of the millah. The nihla here can also mean the millah. This is the millah of Islam, that we give women a monetary gift, something of value, before the male marries them.